Hello and welcome back to Seagulls Central. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for putting on this video. And if you're listening on the podcast, thank you so much for putting me in your ears wherever you are today and getting the podcast on. Oh my God, where do we even begin? Just an absolute car crash, an absolute embarrassment of a game against Nottingham Forest, which I'm going to be digging into in this video. I think it's as bad as it gets, that result. The performance at times was okay, but there were so many bad things to go into in that game. And I think this will now serve as a bit of a turning point for Brighton fans. For the rest of the season, it's been a really, really tough one. But thank you so much for putting this on and choosing to come and kind of have your post-match debrief here. It means a lot. If you haven't already, please drop a subscription, press the subscribe button below, get in the comments, let me know. Do you think it's time up for Fabian Hürzeler? What did you think of the game at Forest? Do you think he approached it right? Do you think it's on him? Do you think this is a player's thing? Do you think this is bigger than one individual? How are you kind of feeling after this? Because it feels messy. And looking at social media throughout this game, after the game, it's looking really rough. And I think we're beginning to see a real swell of Brighton fans maybe turning on Fabian Hürzeler. Now, I'm going to try and make the case for and against in this episode. I'm going to dig into the game itself, but I think there are definitely questions to be asked. I think let's begin with the team news that Fabian Hürzeler put out. Now, obviously, Brighton at the moment, still struggling with injuries. We've got a fair few players out, players that we would like to kind of fill gaps. We aren't able to pick. Players that we bought for big money in the summer, you think of players like Kadioglu aren't able to play. We're having to turn to players like Tariq Lamptey at left back. It's not ideal. However, despite only having a few central fit midfielders at the club at the moment, Fabian Hürzeler put out a side this afternoon against Nottingham Forest with only one central midfielder, which, if you ask me, is absolutely insane. Jack Hinshelwood, with his first start since he came back from injury, a long injury, a few months out he's been out, and a player who's always partnered a Baleba, who'd been in the central midfield with partners, is forced to play in what I believe to be the most pure Fabian Hürzeler way. I remember having a discussion with some people in pre-season, at the QPR game in pre-season, and watching it and just going, I do not get this. We just have no midfield in the sense that we don't play through the midfield. We didn't bring on a player like Baleba until the end of that game. He played at left back and we weren't really focusing on the midfield. And I think today against Nottingham Forest, we saw that again. We've seen it a few times. I've not quite understood what the style of play is with Fabian Hürzeler, but he totally bypassed any need for a midfield in that first half, playing a 4-1-5 almost pretty much, with Jack Hinshelwood as the only central midfielder, with players like João Pedro having to drop in, Rutter having to drop in, Minteh on the right and Mitoma on the left behind Danny Welbeck. Now, I get that we're obviously light in midfield, but you're going away to Nottingham Forest, a team who famously at the moment are dynamic, energetic, get in your faces, make the game difficult for you, love a counter-attack, love playing with pace on the break. And we're playing one central midfielder, not even really a holding midfielder. We're just playing a central midfielder, a 19, 20-year-old in central midfield with no one around him. Now, look, I know in the second half we continued to concede goals, but we looked more solid at times. And I know we broke down at times and we gave away some stupid goals. But actually, when we brought on Gomez, O'Reilly, we looked like we had a midfield who were essentially playing 4-4-1-1, 4-4-2. You just think to yourself, why are we not doing that from the start? What is Fabian Hürzeler attempting to do here? I understand that he's a new manager in the Premier League. I understand that these things take time. But what are you doing? It is complete naivety. Absolute, complete and utter naivety. It's silly. You don't go away to a team who are third in the league, who are famously energetic, and you put one midfielder in midfield. Even Roberto De Zerbi wouldn't have done that with that expansive style of football he played. It's so naive. And I heard him speak before the game, and Fabian Hürzeler was saying that for him, it's not so much about the tactics, but it's more about you play your way and your philosophy and based on how you think you can beat the opposition. Now, I'm sorry, you can have your philosophy all you like, but going away to the City ground with one central midfielder, it's an absolute disgrace. Now, look, we can get into the individual goals. We started off very unfortunately, with that first Dunk goal. It's an accident. It's a shame. It's poor defending from Dunk, and I will get into that later in the show. But actually, it was kind of symptomatic of, just a style of play which was so not joined up in this game. There was no cohesion to the way we played. We couldn't form patterns of play. Now, in the first half, I will admit, until we conceded our first goal, Brighton actually looked quite decent. We had a fair few chances. I remember Minteh getting in behind a few times. Obviously, Danny Welbeck with a few decent shots. Rutter had a chance. João Pedro had a chance right at the start. But we weren't able to look like we had a grip on the ball. As soon as we conceded that first goal, we just lost all ability to hold on to the ball, all ability to build up passages of play. And it felt like the crowd immediately got under Brighton's skin, got under the players' skin, and they knew how to play against us. Two really dynamic wingers on the break. Morgan Gibbs-White sitting in a kind of 10 position, drifting out wide, playing in balls left, right and centre, with players like Alanga running at you with pace. Against, Tariq Lamptey, Lewis Dunk, I'll get on to those players later. And we just, when you're coming up against players like that, with so much electricity, you've got to just sometimes sit in at times. You've got to sometimes, think to yourself, what are we doing playing 5 attackers here and 1 midfielder? Let's hook off a couple of these players, shore up our midfield, and let's just camp out. Let's just, hold on to the ball for a little bit and try and stifle any sort of attacks against us. It was naive to say the least, and I think for me, this now gets to a point where I am really, really beginning to question Fabian Hürzeler. Not only is it a 7-0 defeat, that's utterly embarrassing, and the headlines will write themselves around that. The fan, sentiment will form itself when a score like that is kind of being displayed. However, I think there's so much more to it than that. It's the utter naivety, and it's the fact that even under Roberto De Zerbi, my key criticism of him was the fact that we at times looked, we could go and score loads of goals, but we looked quite defensively weak at times. Now, in this game, we didn't even really look, my worry this season is we don't look like a fabulous team who are really kind of, we're playing a perfect style of play, a pattern of play. We can follow a style, we can get behind an identity. I'm not getting that with Fabian Hürzeler. I'm getting, I'm getting a manager who I can't really massively get behind because I don't really quite understand what his style is. And we're still conceding loads of goals. I was actually prepared to give it a bit of slack when we were a team who didn't have a massive style, but we were quite resolute. We were quite pragmatic. We could maybe not concede loads of goals. We looked a bit more defensively solid than we did under De Zerbi. However, when you go and get dicked 7-0, don't have a style of play and play 1 player in midfield and play 5 players up front, I just don't get it. I truly don't understand it. And I think there are questions to be asked now around, is he getting enough out of this Brighton squad? Brighton obviously spent 200 million in the summer, 250 million even in the summer. Bringing in players in this January window, we can get on to whether they brought in enough and, in a later video. Is he getting enough out of this squad? Now, obviously, the issue with Roberto De Zerbi was the fact that there was a transfer policy disagreement between him and the board. However, I believe, and I know you don't want to hark back, but I believe he would have got way better in terms of personal improvement. You're seeing improvements in individual players in terms of having such a, varied and high quality level of players. Is he getting enough out of it? I really don't think he is. No, yes, we can point the finger and say there were a number of individual errors. We looked very poor at the back. Our defending was woeful at times. But can you sit there really and listen to, ask this question to yourself right now. Is he getting the best out of what is, and you might say, yeah, the defence is weak, out of what is a very high quality level of squad? Arguably, there's an argument to say it's Brighton's best ever squad. Now, you might say the one where we, got into the Europa League is, but, there's a big argument to say that in terms of quality, this is the most technically gifted, high quality, certainly high value squad we've ever had. Is he getting enough out of it? I'm not seeing the development in players. I'm not seeing an ability to tactically tweak a game mid-game. we saw it at Man United. I came on after that game and said, you know what, fair play to him. I think he got the tactics right, and he did. But I'm not often seeing, in a game like against Forest, where we go 2 goals down early on or 3 goals down in 30 minutes, how are we changing it? Okay, he waits till half-time, he brings in a couple of centre mids, and then the same issues happen. But I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing a style. I'm not seeing... And we're going to getting pumped. Now, look, the real question we need to ask ourselves is, are Brighton going to make a change? Are they going to get rid of him? And should they get rid of him? Now, for me, I don't think long-term I don't think he is the manager that Brighton need right now. I think with a really high-quality squad, I don't think he is the manager who can propel us into that next level, that next stratosphere that we're trying to get into, that the club are showing such ambition to get to. I don't think he is that. However, should he be sacked tomorrow, what end does that serve? Okay, we bring in what? We bring in Andrew Crofts and James Milner to the end of the season. What purpose does that serve? And it's not going to happen. Tony Bloom, Paul Barber are not going to sack him. I would be absolutely shocked if they sacked him. And I kind of get that, to be honest. I do get that in the sense that you can't... Whenever you appoint a 31-year-old manager, you are working with the assumption that, of course, because he's 31, he's never managed in the league before, and we've got a brand new squad of brand new players, and there's been such overhaul of kind of the squad in the last year or so, that actually it will be rocky and there will be difficult times. However, they'll be looking at that result, looking at that performance, looking at the way that we conceded some of those goals, looking at the fan sentiment, looking at the fact that we turned up in an away game with one-man midfield, and that's naive. It's an immature management style. I don't understand it. And I think we're now at the point where Fabian Hürzeler has eroded a lot of the goodwill that many Brighton fans will have. Now, the Brighton away fans, of course, I've always said that the Brighton away fan is incredibly supportive. However, at the Amex, I think it can be incredibly fickle. And I think if another result like this happens at the Amex, even just, another defeat like the Everton game, I think it could be really toxic. And I think we could end the season in a really difficult patch. Now, maybe at the end of the season, would the club look at the Fabian Hürzeler situation and think, maybe we make a decision then? But it's really tough, because what's the point in bringing a 31-year-old manager in who you clearly back, and then only give him a season? Now, for me, the thing as well is that it's quite obvious that he wasn't Brighton's first choice, and Brighton have never, publicly addressed that. But Kieran McKenna was Brighton's first choice last summer when Roberto De Zerbi left. He obviously rejected Brighton, and we brought in Fabian Hürzeler. I would love to know the genuine level of support that he has from the Brighton hierarchy. Now, I feel a little bit bad kind of talking so much around kind of whether he will be sacked or not, but I think these questions do need to be asked when you're not seeing a massively clear style of play, you're not seeing an improvement in personnel and players, particularly young players, you're seeing big defeats like that, and you're seeing immature, naive, tactical decision-making, i.e. playing one man in midfield away at Nottingham Forest. I think it's really, really important. Now, there are definitely questions to be asked around the playing squad, the personnel that we do have. Whilst we have spent 250 million on so many players, we are also in a position where actually there are a number of players, particularly in defence, where we need to see that transition. We need to see, in my opinion, and when the news broke on Friday or whenever it was around Lamptey, so many people were going, oh no, we can't lose him, this is a joke. For me, I'm sorry, I've said it for a while. If we can cash in on Lamptey now, we need to. He's a decent player. I like the bloke. I think he's got attributes going forward. However, for me, he is emblematic of what is wrong with our defence. He's a player who isn't a fantastic defender. We've seen it for a while. He's injury prone. We can't rely on him. If we can get money and move on, I think that's brilliant. Lewis Dunk at the moment had I think at the moment he's in a difficult patch. He had a really poor game against Forest. There were moments where I saw him coming up against one-on-one against Alanga. There were, obviously the first goal was unlucky. There was, I don't even know what goal it would have been, the third goal maybe. 1v1 versus Alanga. Of course, anyone can get done in that situation, but it was such poor defending. He really didn't do anything to kind of get in the way. I think there's glaring holes in our defence at the moment. We need to find a long-term successor to Lewis Dunk. Now, maybe Aaron Cashin is that. We need to replace that left and right-hand side in the fullbacks. We need to strengthen that. Joel Veltman is fantastic, but we need more of that. We need a left-back who can be consistent and reliable. Purvis Estupiñán is that. We need to have, we probably need to bring another fullback, be that right-back or left-back, and hopefully we're going to be able to do that in the rest of the window. But, Kadioglu, we don't really know if he is a genuine defender. We need to bolster that. And I think in the summer, bringing in a centre-half, bringing in a fullback will be a massive part of the regeneration of this side. And probably as well, bringing another defensive midfielder into the side is what we need as well, because we only really rely on Carlos Baleba. Yes, we have Matt Weaver, who is a more defensive-minded midfield player, but actually is quite immobile, not that typical type of defensive midfielder that we've needed. Someone like a Malik Yalkule looks like that could be him, but I think we probably need another one of a Baleba, not Baleba quality, but a primed and ready to go player who we can drop in at DM next season. I think will be so important. And there are questions to be asked around the players. I think Dunk had a very poor performance against Nottingham Forest. And if it were me, I would be making that change in the next game. I would be doing it. I understand he is the leader. I understand that, I appreciate that he is, the greatest player to have ever played for this football club in the modern era. However, in the right here and now, I think we do need to look at, particularly coming up against Chelsea, is it next week, playing against Chelsea in the FA Cup? It will be interesting to see the changes we make there, the opportunities we potentially give to different players, because I would love to see someone grasp that opportunity. Can a Cashin cement a place with Jan-Paul van Hecker until the end of the season? Do you think I'm being harsh here, ripping into Lewis Dunk? I don't know. I almost feel a bit of guilt doing this, but it just feels to me like we need to regenerate this defence in somehow. And if we can't bring in all the players we need this transfer window, let's just force it. Let's just, for the second half of the season, let's just force some changes. Let's play Aaron Cashin every game until the end of the season. Why not? Let's give Rory McConville a run. Like, why not? I think for all of the attacking quality that we have, we still look very short in defence. And I'm struggling to understand whether that is a personnel thing purely, or whether that's partly a tactics, a style of play, a Fabian Hürzeler thing, because it's really poor. We look so weak at times. There's been many games this season where we've been cut open way too easily. We've been balls playing in behind us so easily. I always criticise De Zerbi for being a little bit open and expansive, but we seem to be a team who can just get opened up quite easily at the moment. And maybe it's because our midfield's not quite worked out. Maybe it's because our fullbacks aren't really fullbacks, and there's so many reasons to it. But I do think it's a managerial thing, and I ultimately come back to this. I think if we had something to get behind in terms of Fabian Hürzeler, for me, if it was a personality that was really infectious, if it was a style of play where you sat there and going, you know what, I can see what we're doing here. He's clearly trying to play this certain way. But different games, different horses for different courses. I kind of think that's good sometimes, but actually in terms of looking at it in a broader, bigger picture, what's the style? I don't really get it. And therefore it's hard for me to get behind. So when results like this happen, I think to myself, does this guy have the chops? Does this guy have it about him? Because I don't know if he does. I really don't know if he does. And of course, look, Brighton should stick with him to the end of the season. I will reiterate that again on this show. Of course, they should stick with him to the end of the season. But the jury is out. The jury is out for me. The questions are being asked. I am very, very unsure about whether he is the man to lead Brighton going forward. But what's the alternative? Brighton aren't going to appoint a youth academy coach as the first team manager to the end of the season, suddenly look brilliant. The pride element as well for Tony Blue and Paul Barber, would they sack a manager halfway through a season who they brought in at 31 years old after taking De Zerbi away from the club, and with all the good PR around the club? How bad would that look on them? I don't know. Would they want to do that? I doubt it. But does it need to be done? Yeah, perhaps. I think it does. I just don't know. I don't know what the club will do. I think the club will back him. I think the club will stick behind him. I think the club in the summer will get behind him. I think they'll continue to back him. And I think we maybe will see the best of Fabian Hürzeler in the future. And Europe isn't necessarily off the table, I get that. But with humbling, embarrassing performances like that at Nottingham Forest, it certainly creates far more questions than it does provide answers. And yeah, I think, there are a few players who come away with something to kind of, not to be proud of, they can come away feeling okay about their performance. I think Minteh was good. I think even towards the end of the game, he was putting a shift in. I thought he looked bright throughout the game. I think Mitoma looked decent in the first half before he was substituted. I think Adingra looked all right in the second half when he came on. I think Danny Welbeck continued to look pretty decent and solid up top. I know I heard a lot of stick for Jack Hinshelwood, but I do feel sorry for him in central midfield. I think he did an okay job. It's difficult to make a judgment on a player like Diego Gomez because I still didn't really see much of him on the ball. Off the ball, he looked a bit wanting at times. I thought Matt O'Reilly looked quite good, played a few nice balls in behind. There are some aspects of that team who can come away with a decent, they can have a pat on the back and go, you played okay. But overall, as a collective, it was we've been like this for too long. Actually, I think even under De Zerbi as well. We conceded goals. Suddenly, we've conceded 4 goals. And I thought maybe we got over a hill with that. Clearly not. There's regeneration needed in that backline. It's abundantly clear. There's reinforcements needed to bring in. Whether they can do that in the final days of the window, who knows? There's talk of a left back potentially coming in, but I think there's. I would love to be a fly on the wall in the Brighton boardroom right now. At the end of this game, Tony Bloom, Paul Barber, David Weir talking to each other. Where are their heads at? They're not going to drop their ego and make a decision now, are they? And they probably shouldn't. But God, it creates so many questions. We've got a difficult run coming up now. We've got Chelsea twice in 2 weeks. That's going to be tough. I could see us losing both those games. And suddenly we're out of the FA Cup. We're dropping down the table, and I don't want to sound too cynical, but I think it could get quite bad quite quickly, and it's rough. I'm going to be jumping on in a few days' time to review the transfer window, to kind of talk about where we are after everyone's head has cooled down. But I think there will be a lot of fans this afternoon, this evening, rest of the weekend, who will be really questioning Fabian Hürzeler, because I think this is on him. This is absolutely on him, because we saw that lineup. We saw the tactics that he adopted for that game against Forest, and it was so utterly wrong, completely wrong, and it just really, really dwindles my faith in the question, is he a manager who has the chops to manage in the Premier League? And it's harsh because he's 31, and I don't want to make a judgment on the bloke already, but there's questions to be asked, and I guess it's our job as fans to answer them. So if you disagree with me, or if you agree with me, tell me what you think in the comments. Let me know. Is this the end of the road for Fabian Hürzeler? It probably isn't, though, is it? But do you think there'll be a decision made in the summer? Do you think he's the manager for the long term? Do you think we'll see him at the club in a year's time? Where do you think we'll be at? Does this squad need more overhauling? Do you think there's too much emphasis on attacking players than there were defensive players? Do you think it's time for Lewis Dunk to maybe take a little bit of a back seat as maybe a third choice centre-back in this side? Does Tariq Lamptey, do you take that money from Ajax that's supposedly come in and run with it, 1.5 million, another poor performance from him? Am I being too reactionary? I'd like to think I've kind of framed this within my view that I've held repeatedly throughout this channel for this season. But let me know what you think. An embarrassing day for Brighton, and one that hopefully we can bounce back from. If you've enjoyed this video, not that you probably have, because what a nightmare it's been, but if you've enjoyed the reaction to this, please do subscribe to the channel, drop a like, drop your comment below. I'll get back to you if you do comment. I love getting involved in the conversation, and I really, really appreciate you watching the video again. As always, it's Seagulls Central on Twitter as well. You can follow me there for all the latest Brighton news and analysis and everything in between. And I'll see you midweek for a little bit of chat about the transfer window. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, up the Albion.